finishes off in style. A magnificent strike into the crowd. India lift the World Cup after 28 years.
The cricket calendar is steaming ahead. We had England versus West Indies, which has just finished with England winning 2-1 in the Test series. Shortly, and in fact, when I say shortly, on the day of recording, we have England versus Ireland starting a first ODI in 140 days. And then, of course, we are following it up with England versus Pakistan. Then there's the CPL to follow. And maybe, just maybe, there will also be the Lankan Premier League, the first ever Lankan Premier League, or you can just say restarting it. But then comes the bigger news. There are two big news which form the bedrock of this episode. The first, the cancellation of the 2020 ICC Men's T20 World Cup, and subsequently the announcement of the 2020 Indian Premier League. Hello and welcome to this episode of HotSpot. As always, I am your host, Chetan Narula, sports journalist and broadcaster. And with me, of course, is Deep Dasgupta, my co-host, who is a bit late because he is, shooting for Star Sports. You'll probably see him on the weekend. At the moment, though, I am happy to welcome our special guest all the way from down under. He is one of the most prominent cricket journalists from Australia, one of the most travel journalists from Australia. He writes in an unabashed Australian manner for The Australian. He's a beer connoisseur, a keen traveler, and also the beer editor of The Australian. We welcome for the first time to HotSpot, Peter Lalor. Peter, welcome. How are you? How's the lockdown going in Australia? How are things in Australia currently?
Greetings from Sydney. What an intro that was. Right in Australian for the Australian. I've never thought, yeah, really. Is it, how are things going on? We're blessed in Australia. We've done pretty well in this pandemic. It's a bit concerning down there in Victoria. At the moment, I'm in Sydney, in New South Wales. We're just bubbling along, but we don't have any neighbours. We're a long way from the rest of the world. No one wants to be near us, I think, actually, Chetan. So we're going all right, and you're going okay over there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's getting a bit better in Delhi, at least in this part of India. In Mumbai, also the cases have gone down over the last week. In other parts of the country, we're having lockdowns intermittently, but hopefully, the worst is behind us. That's all we can hope. And we're talking about a lot of vaccines, news about a lot of vaccines all across the world. So we are hoping that in the next couple of months, we do have a vaccine coming in. Let's jump on straight to this episode. First, we have to talk about England, West Indies. England winning 2-1. Always were going to come out on top in that contest. It was always bowling versus bowling, batting versus batting, and West Indies batting was a bit lightweight. Peter, your thoughts on that? Happy to have some cricket on your screens, but no surprises that England won.
No surprises that England won, although I think we all got a bit excited, didn't we, when the West Indies played so well in that first test. And Jason Holder's a great captain, isn't he? And what a fantastic effort for that West Indian team to leave the Caribbean, where there is barely any COVID, to go to a country which had one of the higher death rates in the world. So basically they've risked their lives and health to go there. Not all of them went. And it's understandable why some of them wouldn't go. They endured 2 weeks in lockdown in Manchester and basically were locked down for the 8 weeks. Played well that first test. But what's going on with the toss, mate? Everybody knows you win the toss, you bat. But in the second test and the third test, Holder won the toss and he bowled, and it never works out too well. Just ask Tim Payne about what happened in the last Ashes over there in the fifth test. But yeah, just great to have cricket back on the television. Two really good teams, lots of characters, isn't there? And Stuart Broad, God, I mean, can we speak Indian to Australian? I mean,
absolutely.
We kind of wanted the Windies to win, didn't we? Everybody enjoys it when England loses, but he is something else, Stuart Broad, when he gets some wind in his sails. And he was obviously, his ego was pricked when they left him out of the first test. He was very upset by that. It was interesting to read Michael Vaughan say that sometimes he drops into his columns criticisms of Stuart Broad because he knows that Stuart Broad will respond out on the pitch. So note to Indian newspapers and to Australian newspapers, never run a Michael Vaughan column when you're playing England because he's sending out messages to the cricket team. But yeah, some very good cricket and such a good thing to see cricket being played again. I think I probably saw did I see the last international game? Was that New Zealand versus Australia at the SCG with no crowd?
Yeah,
way back
probably.
when that was.
Yeah. That was the last game. Yeah, that was the last ODI, and that's what we mentioned at the top of the episode, that we're going to have another ODI finally after 140 days, England versus Ireland. But yeah, a couple of interesting points you touched there, Peter. First of all, the toss. Yes, I think the issue with the toss there was that West Indies thought their better chance of them, if they knock over England cheaply, then their batting might have that mental fortitude to score some runs. But if you allow them to get away, which is what happened in the third test, especially with the tail wagging and Stuart Broad scoring those runs. Once you allow England to get those runs, after that, that's game over. So perhaps West Indies thought their best chance is to attack England first up, because if they bat first and they get rolled over for 120, 150, then the game is as it is over. So I think that's where West Indies roll the dice. But yes, fantastic effort from the West Indies. I think the whole cricket world should really applaud West Indies because, as you mentioned, to go from the Caribbean where there's so few cases and to go and play in England, stay inside a bubble. And we're going to talk a lot about this bubble. Stay inside a bio bubble for, say, 40 days, locked up inside your hotels. I mean, Peter is no stranger to traveling on a cricket tour, same as me. I've been lucky to have done a few tours myself, especially to Australia. And touring is a lot of fun. You go out when there's an off day, you go out and you sample some beers, perhaps what Peter does. I go out and take in the sights.
Visit some temples, mate. Visit some temples.
Something
something like that. Yeah. Cultural.
Cultural. But this time around, it wasn't as such fun. You have to stay inside a bubble. You have to stay inside a bubble for 40 days, make sure that, it's not broken. So it was tough for the West Indies to do that. And once the series was over, their flight got delayed because of a cyclonic storm in the Caribbean. So they had to endure an extra day inside the bubble. But yes, some great characters there. Peter, Jason Holder said that, West Indies cricket doesn't earn unless it's India, England, or Australia playing them, touring them. And West Indies Cricket Board is looking at pay cuts for their players. How important is it for the cricket world to stand up, be it England, be it Australia, be it India, and make sure that West Indies and other teams like that who are coming forward and helping out international cricket at this time, how important is it to help them out?
Oh, it's essential. And I was really, I thought that the things that Holder said at the end of that test match were compelling. He's a really intelligent captain, isn't he? He's one of those good cricket captains, a thoughtful, articulate man who not only understands the game he's just played, but the game as a whole. It's no news to anyone that if you don't play India, England, or Australia, you don't make money. That is the case for all of cricket. And the great concern is in these immediate times where everybody has lost a lot of money, everyone's staring at losses, that those three nations only play among themselves to fill up the bank, to put a lot of money in the piggy bank and neglect the other countries. We cannot let that happen. Cricket is so... I wrote this after the first test. Cricket is better when the West Indies are winning. Cricket is a fantastic place when the West Indies are strong. Cricket needs the West Indies to be competitive, to give something else in the calendar for fans to see. Equally with South Africa. See, South Africa, I think, are right on the edge of a cliff. I think they're hanging on financially. They've always been a competitive team, but their administration, their cricket is a shambles at the moment, or quasi-shambles. That might be a bit Australian, sorry. We need cricket to support it. We need those sorts of tools. We need to keep West Indies strong. We need to keep South Africa strong. We need to keep Pakistan strong. I know it's a political issue in your country, and I won't go there, but I am desperate for Australia to go to Pakistan and play cricket and get Pakistan cricket up and running again, because they need to stand on their own 2 feet. Because the more people that play cricket and play cricket well, the better it is for cricket. That's why, that's why it is a bit of a concern with I understand why the World Cup has been cancelled. That's common sense. That's fine. It's fine for the IPL to fill in that window, and I saw that narrative come out of India about how much money and how valuable the IPL is to world cricket. I think I saw a figure that said 1 rupee in every 3 or $1 in every 3 generated last year came from the IPL. Bit cynical about the figures, but I don't reckon they're that wrong. That's good. It does generate that money, but it does not go to it doesn't trickle down to the nations that need it. That money goes to franchises, it goes to players. The boards get a little cut here and there, like I think, for their players being involved. But it's very important that the smaller nations stay strong in cricket. I'll get off my high horse right now.
I did speak about cricket broadcasting in our previous episode with Deep Dasgupta and cricket director Hemant Buch. So you might want to tune in and figure out, what are the intricacies of the economics of cricket broadcasting and how it impacts these, I wouldn't say smaller nations, but second-tier nations. When you say South Africa, West Indies, New Zealand, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, their main income is cricket broadcasting, and that is why the tours of India, Australia, and England hold so much importance. Some very valid points there from Peter, adding on perhaps to our last episode. Before we move on, and you mentioned about the T20 World Cup and the IPL, we're just going to come to that equation in just a moment. You mentioned Stuart Broad, and just can't move on without talking more about him. One of the very few bowlers in Test cricket. Peter is smiling at the mention of Stuart Broad again. 500 plus wickets. It's always a special feat. Next year, India play England at home. Whether it's in UAE or in India, I have a running bet with ESPN Cricket Info's George Dobell. Then India go to England and play a Test series there. And then you have England touring Australia for the Ashes. A lot of Test cricket coming up for England. Where do you see Stuart Broad in there? I mean, do you see him playing consistently? Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad. Do you want to see Australia facing them again in in a year's time in the Ashes?
Hey, we don't mind Jimmy Anderson coming down here. He's half the bowler in Australia. It's a lot harder to bowl in Australia than England. I love watching Stuart Broad bowl. He is he's the fantastic sort of pantomime villain, particularly in this country. He really plays it up against the Australians. Everybody seems to play it up against the Australians, Chetan. 500 wickets, an extraordinary achievement. He's 34, but his mate Jimmy's 38. What an incredible feat. To have those 2 bowlers in your team with 1,100 wickets. It will reach a point where England will have to be careful, won't they? Because at some point you run out of petrol tickets, don't you? And we've seen that. I think particularly with we saw it with Brett Lee in Test cricket to a degree, even though he still kept his speed. But we saw it also with Jason Gillespie in Australia, and you see that with fast bowlers. But Stuart Broad, well, he doesn't bowl that far. He's not out and out pace, and he's a brilliant bowler, and particularly at home. And isn't it interesting that at 34 years old, he's changed his run-up, he's changed his positioning a little, he's changed his lengths, and he seems to have found the magic bullet. Not that he really needed one. I think I have horrific memories of him taking 8 for 15, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Against Australia at Trent Bridge one morning. Yeah, he was unplayable. Those guys are great. And cricket's great when the ball's doing a bit. I mean, cricket's great in India when the ball's spinning out, ragging out of the rough, and where a batsman's hanging on for dear life, that's when cricket's best. So that's why I really love those guys like Broad when they get their tails up. It's a lot harder to do that in Australia. It doesn't offer that.
It'll be interesting to see Broad's lengths in India next year and against India, playing both in India and in England. But at the same time, England have to worry about bringing up the likes of Jofra Archer and Mark Wood. because you don't want to be stranded when both of them disappear, both Anderson and Broad disappear at the same time.
No, you don't want to be stranded, but I would argue that probably those two bowlers are ripe and ready to go. So it will be, yes, getting Jimmy. Yeah, I think Jimmy is on the way out, isn't he? And there's a lot of cricket coming up, and I think the cricket that we will see played in the next year or so will be played in a very compact way. That there will be a lot of back-to-back tests. It will be difficult, and you will need to rotate your bowlers. And you saw how well it worked to keep Stuart Broad out of that first test. Well, you lost the test. You got a great reward for second and third. Maybe that wasn't the intention, but there may be a need to rotate bowlers. And gee, there's a lot of good fast bowlers going around in the world cricket at the moment, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely.
India's probably got the best seam attack it's ever had. Australia have got some pretty decent fast bowlers going around. So it's a good time in world cricket for fast bowlers. Can't last forever, but it's a good time.
Well, it's a good time to be a fast bowler, not so great time to be an opening batsman. And on that thought, we have former Indian cricketer and broadcaster Deep Dasgupta finally joining us on this show. Better late than never. Welcome back, Deep, to HotSpot. We'll start off immediately with what we're talking about here is England-West Indies. Your thoughts on Broad's 500 wickets, and of course a question leaning on there about Jofra Archer and Mark Wood coming up, and with a little bit focus on Jofra when he stepped out of that bubble and put everything to risk. First on Stuart Broad.
Right. Okay. To start off with, thank you for rubbing it in, Chetan. Thank you again. But yeah, so having said that, I mean, listen, I mean, Stuart Broad is a modern day great. I mean, there's no two ways about it, especially the way he's bowled. Yes, English conditions with a Duke ball, obviously there's a little bit of an advantage if you're a fast bowler. But also, if you look at his numbers outside England, they're very impressive as well. You know, he's one of those English bowlers who've managed to find a way to pick wickets on subcontinental tracks as well, you know, with cutters and everything else and slowers that he's picked up and built in the last few years. So I think he's really, really good that way. And he's become a kind of an all-condition bowler, not just specifically Duke's ball, English conditions. So that's one thing. Moving to the other thing, I think what Peter mentioned, I completely agree that this is a really good time for fast bowlers. Also, to a certain extent, the kind of surfaces that are available all over the world now. If you look at the surfaces, the test surfaces in the last couple of years has been bowler friendly. You see a lot of bowler friendly surfaces in test match cricket. That's where even in India, if you look at the last test series versus South Africa, I mean, Ranchi was a green top where the Indian fast bowlers picked, I think, all 20 wickets or something like that. So those are things that are helping the faster bowler at this point in time. And to be fair, there are quality fast bowlers as well. There's no two ways about it. Talking about England, I think they really, and I completely agree with Peter when he mentioned about rotating the faster bowlers, because obviously, as he mentioned, there'll be a lot of back-to-back tournaments with all the backlog now. And on top of that, conditions also. I mean, to be very honest, I don't see any sense playing Anderson on let's say, on Indian surfaces. You know, you rather have somebody like Mark Wood who would reverse the ball and bowl at 140 plus. I don't know whether you would want to play Anderson even for the Ashes for that matter. You know, where you need 140 plus bowlers. One of the things that you need in Australia is pace. And I don't see too many bowlers, I mean, making too much of a difference bowling at 130, 135. So when you have someone like Mark Wood, you've got to be very careful how you use Mark Wood. You've got to be very careful whether you let him play county cricket or not. I mean, one of the major issues in England is if you're going to let your faster bowlers, 140 plus bowlers, play county cricket, play every week, bowling 20 overs and things, you're not going to have 140 plus bowlers left. I mean, sooner or later, if Mark Wood plays a couple of seasons of county cricket, he won't be bowling at 140 plus. He'll be bowling at 135 and trying to swing the ball. Same with someone like Jofra Archer. So they've got to be extremely careful how they handle the new crop, not just England. I'm just talking about everyone right now. You've got to be very, very careful how you rotate, how you kind of manage the workload of these fast bowlers.
Right, and I mean it's a tough one not to take Jimmy Anderson for the Ashes series. It's there's always going to be a pink ball test match, and I was just watching the
Yeah.
highlights of the last pink ball test match they played in Australia last night. I was watching the highlights, and he was swinging that pink ball, outswing, in swing. The Australian top order didn't have a clue there, and even if for one test match, and we know how important the Ashes is for English cricket, so even if for one test match, they will definitely take Jimmy Anderson. But very valid points. And as Peter mentioned, the next year, the international calendar is going to be really compact. So you don't expect the likes of Mark Wood and Jofra Archer or Jasprit Bumrah, Ishant Sharma, Mohammad Shami, or Pat Cummins or Josh Hazelwood. You don't expect them to play back-to-back matches or unending Test cricket or unending international cricket. I think we need to quickly move on this topic. And again, Deep, coming back to you, uh, this is where our real episode starts, really, because of what Jofra Archer did. Lots been said about it. Lots been written about it. Yes, it was a stupid mistake when he stepped out of the bubble and jeopardized potentially the entire English cricket summer. But that's where the challenge really lies, because the two topics that we are going to cover today is the cancellation of the 2020 T20 World Cup and subsequently the IPL 2020 IPL going ahead. You're talking about a situation where they could not create bio bubbles in Australia, and now a situation where there will be equal number of bio bubbles in the UAE. First of all, again, coming back to the Archer situation, one player steps out or one management official steps out and jeopardizes the whole thing. How important is being knowledgeable here, is being not being absent-minded here? How important is it with the bubble? Probably you will be part of the bubble in the UAE as well.
It's a non-negotiable thing. It is a non-negotiable thing. I think it was extremely irresponsible. You mentioned about jeopardizing the English summer. I would say jeopardizing start of cricket. Can you imagine in the very first or second test match, somebody's, I mean, God forbid, never happens, is found COVID positive. The whole restart of cricket and maybe even sports would take a hit. I mean, we all know how. I mean, there are critics who's saying you can't do without starting sports right now. It might not be first thing on your priority list. So you got to be extremely careful. And every one of us who's part of this fraternity or this ecosystem, we have to be extremely careful and responsible. Like I said, it is a non-negotiable right now, and it is upon us, each one of us, to take that responsibility very, very seriously.
Thank God to hear some common sense, Steve. I've read the English journalists on this topic, and they use the word that you did, a mistake, fine. He gets enough punishment by missing the test while he has the test, and they say that he doesn't have the disease. Rubbish. This was an egregious error. The West Indies players put themselves in danger, put themselves in quarantine, flew to England to participate in a series, and one stupid act. Now, if that guy didn't know what he was doing was wrong, I wonder about his intelligence. And I wonder about his intelligence if he did know what he was doing. It endangered the entire series, and it was an insult to the visitors. And I wrote somewhat with tongue-in-cheek today in the newspaper that maybe visiting teams should ask that the England teams wear ankle bracelets so that they know where they are. Because, I mean, I know I wouldn't want to go all the way to England, some clown, to mess up the whole series, and you have to go home again. I mean, for God's sake. It was really underplayed in the English media, and it annoyed me, but that's me. But good.
Well, it really brings up a very, very interesting point here, Peter, because now let's talk about the 2020 T20 World Cup. It shows the way ECB planned it. In the gap between the test matches, the players are allowed to use their private cars and travel from Southampton to Manchester, and that's where Jofra took that opportunity to go and visit his family. What is the need to do that? Because traveling teams in England always travel in buses. West Indies traveled from Southampton to Manchester in a bus. Why couldn't the English players do the same? Indian players on tour every time they travel in a bus. So again, the question here is, it puts the spotlight on a tournament like the T20 World Cup where you have 16 teams visiting, 7 to 8 venues, a qualifying stage, then a main stage. It just, and practice schedules and the matches, and of course the Indian team or any other team, the Pakistan team, for example, or even the Bangladesh team, Afghanistan, they always have followers following them around at the practice matches, practice venues. You just cannot create a 16-team bubble. I mean, ECB, yes, they've done so well creating a 2-team bubble, but it almost came to naught. A 16 bubble, you just cannot create it. Hence, the right decision to postpone the 2020 T20 World Cup?
Well, it was the only decision that could be made, really, because I don't think there was any will in Australia to host the 16 teams. I would say that Australia is running an 18-team football competition at the moment, but the complexity of it is enormous. It is very difficult. Sometimes the players are going to games with their bags packed and not knowing what's going to happen that night, and they end up on a plane and they end up in another town. So, yeah, it is way too difficult to have a World Cup. But equally, we'll say, well, how many teams in the IPL?
8.
8, yeah. Well, it's only half as difficult, I guess. But
no. But that's an important point.
It was never going to happen. It couldn't happen. Australia would not have opened its borders by that time. And I think we all knew for months, didn't we, that that was off and the IPL was on and everyone was just waiting for the green lights. Where it goes, whether the World Cup's in India in 2021 as planned, and it comes back to Australia in 2022, or as Australia wants to host it in 21. Australia wants your World Cup. I don't think India's open to that idea. I think they should consider it because it helps Australia. It helps Australia. And when we say Australia, I mean, this doesn't make money for Australia. It makes money for world cricket, as we were saying before. Unlike the sort of franchises and the domestic leagues, Australia can then roll over the tickets they've sold and not refund them. So there is not also, it can keep the organising committee in place, and it can keep the sort of deposits on the venues. I believe they can roll them over as well. So all the money that's been spent on organising that competition to this point in Australia will be lost, but it can be salvaged to some degree if Australia get that one. The other point is that, to my knowledge, India doesn't have that tax exemption yet, but I think that they were supposed to have quite some time earlier. So why don't you guys put your feet up, work on your tax exemption? We'll have the World Cup in 2021 and you have it in 2022. Also gives you a chance to sort of maybe get everything back in place so it's a lot easier to conduct the World Cup. Having said that, Australia might actually regret getting it next year because it might not be able to put it on next year. We don't know where we will be, do we?
Absolutely. Interesting points there, and we'll come back to the hosting issue and the tax issue and everything. That's very interesting. But you mentioned, first of all, the 8-team IPL, and this is where I'm moving on next to 8 teams for the IPL. But that's not just it. You'll have 2 or 3 production teams because IMG does the production for BCCI, and then Star Sports will be doing their own. At least one feed, they'll be trying to do at least one feed from the UAE, and Deep will probably be a part of both those productions. Then, of course, there's going to be a BCCI team, which will be keeping an eye on everything. There'll be a medical team, technical team, and of course, the management committee, everything. So you're looking at, if not 16, at least 11 to 12 different teams or groups, which will be in 11 to 12 different bio bubbles. Deep, it's not easy to pull off a 16 bubble event. Easier to pull off a 12 bubble event. Yes, UAE, considering UAE, you have 3 venues, Sharjah, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. You don't have to fly between them. That's the only difference.
Chetan, then as you mentioned, 8 becomes 12, 16 becomes 20, 22, maybe 24. So it's 16 doesn't remain 16 then, right? So, right. See, it's not going to be easy. I'm ask ECB. They'll say, creating bio bubble for 2 teams wasn't easy. So it's not going to be easy. Let's be very, very honest about it. It's going to be extremely tough, and it's also going to be extremely tough to keep everyone disciplined. As you mentioned, we're talking about quite a few people in that bubble, and it'll be very difficult to keep everyone disciplined enough to kind of follow. And mind you, it's not a 2-week 3-week thing. It's like a 50-odd day. I mean, a 6 to 7 week. If you add quarantine and all that, it might end up being 8 to 9 week, or maybe let's say 8-week thing there. So I think it's going to be difficult, but it is important. Let's just be very, very honest about this and say it's important for this to happen for various reasons, for the sport itself, for the sport in India. Again, I'm not just looking at it from the cricketer's perspective. I'm just looking at it from the business or the economy of cricket, the whole ecosystem. It's important. And we'll have to, and like I said, people have to realize how important this is for the ecosystem and act accordingly.
Well, important point there, because it's not just the cricketers and the franchisees or even the BCCI or Star Sports, the broadcasters who are earning from it. It's people like me and people like Deep and people like Peter who are also going to earn from it, because it provides an income for the journalists, for the commentators, and not even that, even for the hospitality sector. Yes, people would argue that it should happen in India, give the hospitality sector a boost here in India. But listen, things are not fine in India at the moment as concerns the COVID-19 breakout. In the UAE, perhaps they are just a bit better and may allow the tournament to progress. You're looking at the marketing budgets that have been cut everywhere for advertising, for revenue generation. Maybe the IPL will kickstart all of that, because in the Indian context, it's not just about staying at home and staying safe and fighting the disease. It's also about kickstarting the economy. And I believe sports plays a big role in any economy, especially the IPL. Coming back to Peter's other point about where the next 2 World Cups could be held. Interesting point there. Yes, Australia will not have to refund those fans' tickets or the hosting fees and everything. As for the taxation issue, the last time India hosted an ICC event, 2016 T20 World Cup, and this is where the tax issue comes from. And we covered the tax issue with Times of India's K. Srinivas Rao in the first episode of this second season of HotSpot, so our listeners and viewers can revisit that. But I would just like to mention here, the tax issue for that 2016 tournament, which began in February, was resolved in January. So Peter says that, yes, we need to take care of that. BCCI would not probably take care of it so soon. It's really political. But Deep, coming back to you here, would it make sense for India to host 2 back-to-back World Cups in 22 and 23 if 21 goes to Australia? Or because like Peter mentioned, if they do that, then the BCCI will also have to have one organizing committee, which takes care of both 2022 and 23.
A very, very valid point what Peter mentioned. Very valid point indeed. Now look at it from BCCI's perspective. Now BCCI a couple of years ago had created this home season, right? October, November, right? During the Diwali period. And this was because you said, there's a festive season and we'll play bilateral series at home. You got to accept the fact that BCCI is giving up a part of its revenue, because it's not going to play bilateral series then. It's going to play 3 ICC events where the revenues are going to ICC, right? So I think that is one thing that they will really need to look into, how they're going to manage that home season for the next 3 years, October-November period. And also, I mean, yes, it makes sense, 22, 23, because there is also 23 50 overs World Cup, 22, 23 happening simultaneously. I don't think that's going to make too much of a difference hosting 2 ICC events. And yeah, I mean, as far as what Peter mentioned about hosting it in Australia next year, it makes a lot of sense. Because as it is, this is a very tough time for everyone. I mean, Cricket Australia has laid off a lot of people. Obviously, it's not just Cricket Australia, it's with all boards right now. So we have to be very, very careful how we handle this. And obviously, associations or boards like Australia, England, and India the major three boards have to be very, very careful how they handle it, because these are the three major boards which will kind of, lead this war, so to say.
Peter, just a final word on this T20 World Cup issue. Cricket Australia, in a bit of a disarray, they had to ask their CEO to leave after all those pay cuts. It's going to be a political issue because the ICC chairman's elections are up due, and we know with the ICC, a lot of politicking happens, especially when you have some big tournaments coming up. How do you see this matter getting resolved? What does your knowledge or information say?
I have no idea. I'm sorry, I have to be honest. The ICC politics, way too complex for me. It's like the UN. It is, and so much intrigue, so much carry on. Don't know. I just hope that whatever happens, that India are happy. I really like the way that India is running its cricket now. I think Sourav Ganguly is a fantastic leader. If he wants to run world cricket, we'll back him. Yeah, he goes all right. We'll like the guy that's been running it at the moment. But whatever happens, the people that run world cricket will have to be very diplomatic, very intelligent, and work out a way, not only that boards make money through these bilateral periods, the India board, the Australia board, the England board will be filling their pockets, but those ICC events, remember there has been this sort of argy-bargy about squeezing that extra ICC event in. They are very important for the rest of world cricket. That is a major part of income for the smaller nations, and they rely on that. So if we want those smaller nations to stay in the game, we need that. We've already seen this year that, was it this year? I've lost all track of time with my COVID memory, that Ireland decided that they wouldn't have a test match because it was too expensive to have a test match.
Yeah, that was this year.
Yeah.
Supposed to be this year, yeah.
Yeah, and possibly I think the Afghanistan test match against Australia won't go ahead because of lots of reasons, but one of the basic ones will be that it just proves inconvenient and expensive. So it needs to be that balancing act between the sort of capitalism of bilateral series, the intense capitalism of the IPL or the BBL, which fills coffers of only certain people, and the socialism of the ICC, which, rises all boats, if I may use that cliche. Yeah, there's my United Nations speak. I'm starting to sound like me and Greta. We're here, mate.
Yeah, Peter, just a follow-up question of that. When you say that, the economics of the IPL and the BBL, which puts the money in the pockets of these boards, at the same time, the Cricket Australia has defined its BBL season, and it's an extended BBL season in which they have also, built in specific dates. For example, like you mentioned with the football season, if the teams need to be moved around, contingency plans really in light of the COVID situation in the BBL.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're saying that it will be a little too expensive to host Afghanistan in that test. Yes, Afghanistan will be visiting and they will probably not be benefiting from anything monetary. But again, to deny them the opportunity when Cricket Australia is ready to host a full international summer with India, but not play one test with Afghanistan, is that justified?
Well, it doesn't. It's harsh, isn't it? I say that it was inconvenient and expensive. If the Australian players if Australia goes to the UK and the Australian players go on to the IPL, getting back in time for that test and out of quarantine is very difficult. That test was a test of convenience because Afghanistan would have been in Australia at the time. So, I think at points where the money's rolling in, you don't have to live in the real world, but the money's not rolling in now. So that test becomes a really expensive proposition for one game of cricket because you've got to fly a team in, you've got to put them into lockdown, you've got to fix your calendar around it. It doesn't sit right. It is unfortunate. I want to see Afghanistan play Australia, but I'm not sure. And that's what I say. It's the balancing act that we have at the time. And there's going to be real issues about all those people coming from the IPL directly to Australia too, that's something that needs to be flagged. That is a genuine issue, because you can come in as a team and you're treated as an entity. The IPL, the Indian team coming in from the IPL and the Australian players coming in from the IPL won't be treated as an entity, because they will have been spread out. They will not have been under the same conditions. They will have only come together at one point. That's a real complexity facing the start of the Australian summer. We'll wait and see what happens there. But my best guess is that Afghanistan test doesn't happen. The first thing we see in Australia is your guys and our guys getting off the same plane from the IPL, going into some sort of modified lockdown, playing among themselves, and then playing the first test of the summer. But I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but that's how I feel it will play.
I want to bring in Deep here and get his perspective as an ex-cricketer. Deep, just picture yourself in today's situation. I'm sure you would love to have played the IPL, but at the same time, there's a lot of debate raging now. The likes of Steve Smith, David Warner, Glenn Maxwell, Pat Cummins, $1.5 million for him playing for the KKR. That season is going to...
Hey,
yeah.
3 million Australian dollars, mate.
3 million is, yeah, one and a half USD, 3 million Australian. So let's stay with 3 million because it's the bigger figure. You can't say no to that and play in the Sheffield Shield, can you?
It's a tough one. I mean, listen, it is a tough one. As Peter mentioned, you got to be very, very careful how you tread this path, because on one side you have to keep cricket as a sport, that in mind, and also on the other side you got to keep take care of the cricketers and their interest. So it's going to be a tricky one. But just taking forward from Peter mentioned, I mean, all these small or short series, they will need to be looked into again, because if you add, I mean, there is not going to be a 7-day, 10-day tours anymore. Add another 14 days in front and 15 days after the tour. So all these 10-day events or 10-day tours will turn into a month plus tour. So you, for example, that India-South Africa series, which was supposed, or India-England for that matter, 3 ODIs, 3 T20. I mean, those aren't practical anymore in these conditions right now. So you got to be extremely careful how you plan your FTP for the next few months or a year or so. And as far as IPL is concerned, it is important. It is not just important for the players. 10% of that fee goes to Cricket Australia as well. So don't forget that. It's not just the players who get paid.
1 million.
Right. So there you go. So it's not just the players who are getting paid through IPL. It's the association, as in the boards as well. So yeah, I mean, yeah, you've got to live with it. At this point in time, you've got to find a mid path where you say, you know, these are the essentials right now for the sport. These are the essential for the cricketers to carry on and stuff, and prioritize things and move on.
Interesting point there from Deep about the economics of what governs the players' movements, and in fact, the money going to Cricket Australia as well. It's important, Peter, because Cricket Australia sort of messed up with their pay schedule. A lot of hue and cry. The world of cricket was surprised with how Cricket Australia had messed up their finances.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what happened there, wasn't it? I'm not sure if it was they messed up their finances or they messed up their management and their messaging. But anyway, they tore themselves apart, and they're trying to put themselves back together again. At this stage, things aren't. My understanding is that there's a reasonable amount of money in the bank, but there are significant costs ahead with biosecurity and those sorts of things. So yeah, what a strange time that was. I think, you know what I reckon, all the football codes down here had lots of dramas too, but their main focus was getting football games on the next weekend. Cricket didn't have anything for ages, so it had plenty of time to argue and sort of tear itself apart. Once the cricket gets started, things will sort themselves out a bit, I hope.
Right. Just a follow-up question on that. You mentioned football starting to go through, and they want India the summer to go through. without a hitch, and hopefully it does, because we want to see Indian players back in action on the international cricket arena. How do you foresee have preparation started in Australia? Because the schedule needs to be worked out once again, because to fit in the T20 series, I believe India wants some changes in the test schedule as well. There's a week's gap between the second and the third test. The situation in Melbourne is not really good. So can you tell us something about the India's tour of Australia, and how do you foresee the preparation, and how do you foresee it going ahead?
I can tell you that if you, that fixture, those dates are not worth the paper they're written on. They're not worth the sort of digital cyberspace they take up. That is a best guess of what will happen. It would be unbelievable arrogance to say, sitting here and now, that you know how the summer is going to play out. But you have to give, just because people are as they are and businesses are what they are, you have to give people something to hang on to. So say, we're playing 4 tests and here are the dates. So that's fine, because as you guys would know, because you're all sort of celebrities, the networks and the radio stations, they need to sign up their rosters for who's going to be where and how many people they need. They need to sort of budget for this and that. So at least they have something to aim for. It's a nonsense. It'll never happen. If that series happens the way as planned, it will be nothing short of a miracle. And that's not any reflection on the people who have done the planning or who are involved. Nobody knows how it's going to play out. When that was done, the World Cup was still on, the IPL wasn't there, Australia wasn't going to England in September, which they will do, to play those that short form format. So everything's up in the air. You have to, Indians are very good at last minute planning and telling Australians to calm down, we'll work it out, okay? Australians get very uptight. Australians like to think that they're laid back people, but they are not laid back people. They want to know when it's on, where it is, what the rules are, and then they're gonna stick to those rules. So I got no idea what's going to happen this summer, but my fingers that I know they will move hell and high water to get India here. Hopefully all the governments will cooperate. Hopefully India will be willing to go through what they have to go through for that to happen. But Australia needs India to play here this summer. And it's going to be great for cricket. And you know what? It's going to be, let's forget all the nonsense, the politics and the pandemic. It's going to be great cricket, because you got us when our pants were down last time. You know, I don't know where Warner and Smith were. I can't remember, but they're going to be back. And I want to see Australia with Warner and Smith against your bowling attack, because you have got a great bowling attack. You proved that last time, but this time it's fair odds, and look out, it's going to be some really good cricket. Yeah.
Just a very quick follow-up on that, Peter. The possibility of India playing all its matches in Adelaide or any one particular venue, what are the odds of that?
Why not? Who knows? If it does boil down to one venue, it will, or 2 venues, it'll be Adelaide and Perth. And knowing India, they'll want it to be Adelaide. They won't want it to be Perth. Personally, I'm pretty happy with that too. But yeah, who knows what the odds are. The advantages that Adelaide and Perth have, for your listeners or viewers who don't know, is that they can create a biosecurity bubble, much like they can in Manchester and Southampton at Aegis Bowl, where there are hotels attached to the ground. Since you and I were last in Adelaide, they've built a hotel at the Oval. I'm not exactly sure where.
Where the practice nets are.
Is it? See?
Yeah.
There you go. So great town, great place for cricket. Always fun to go to Adelaide. So that would be really cool. Perth can do the same thing. They have, the Wacker has a hotel across the road that they can do a biosecurity bubble for. And the new stadium, the Perth Stadium, it can create a biosecurity bubble with the nearby hotel, the casino hotel, where the players can actually walk to and from the ground and not be molested by any virus or bans or anything like that. It will be very disappointing for the Indian players to come to Australia and not be able to go out for dinner and have a little bit of fun, because I know that is one thing that they've always, as you know, really enjoyed coming down here, is they can go out, they don't get harassed too much. I mean, even Sachin Tendulkar can walk the streets, could walk around Sydney and Circular Quay and places like that. So it will be really unfortunate if they can't do those things. Fingers crossed that they can. Because cricket tours are pretty tough, aren't they, when you can't go out? Jason Holder said that 51 days of opening the curtains and looking out on a cricket pitch is rotten. It'd be like, if you're an office worker, it'd be like sleeping next to the photocopier, frankly, and spending your weekends next to the photocopier as well. Even your days off, the photocopier is just there. For 51 days, every time they looked in a certain direction, they saw a cricket pitch, and it's just got to wear you down, no matter how much you love cricket.
Well, talking about talking about boredom on cricket tours, you're not somebody who's a stranger to that, and you've found yourself walking around and exploring. And of course,
I've never been bored on a cricket tour.
Yeah, you've never been bored. And, because you're the beer connoisseur of the Australian, here's an interesting fact for you. I went to Munich in 2014. Did you know, Peter, that by decree, any beer which is not made in Bavaria, in Germany, is not technically beer?
Is this the Reinheitsgebot law we're speaking of?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Because it was because we have the beer fest over there, and the beer fest was actually a wine fest when it first started. So every year when they have the Oktoberfest, which probably they won't have this year, there is a tent of wine. There's a wine tent in the middle of all the beer tents, and that's to commemorate, because the starting of the Oktoberfest was with wine. But they started creating beer. Beer was first created in Bavaria because of the cholera epidemic, because the water was so bad, so they had to boil it over. And then they thought, okay, let's add all these things. That's how beer was born. My question to you, on all your travels, and you've traveled far and wide, which are the best brews that you've had for our listeners and viewers? I mean, in India, in England, in Sri Lanka, in the Caribbean. Come on, give us something special here.
You know what? I'm getting old, and I'm very old school. I love an English real ale on the keg. A natural beer that's alive, that's brewing in the old-fashioned way. I will say one thing that pleases me is the most popular beer in the world today, that every man or woman with tattoos and beards and greyhounds and sort of hanging out in cafes drinks India Pale Ale. India Pale Ale is the #1 beer in the world among cool people, and that's a fantastic thing. Do you know how India Pale Ale came about, if we're going to do the thing?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Because those awful English people who came to your country like they did to ours, that you can't brew beer in a hot country. It's impossible if you don't have refrigeration, and there wasn't refrigeration there. So they brewed real ales, that they're traditional pale ales, but a special brew that actually ferment in the barrel on the way on the ship on the way to India. So they put a lot of alcohol in, and they put a lot of hops in. So an India Pale Ale is always more hoppy and bitter, because a hop is a preservative, as is alcohol. So by the time it got to India, it was just right for drinking. 2 days in the sun, it was terrible. But that first day, when you got it on the decks, it actually made the journey out. So that's how the India Pale Ale came about. It was made for the journey from England to India. Anyway, how did we get on to beer? What's your favourite beer?
I mean, anything from the tap. I'm not a big, I like beer, but anything from the tap.
Yeah.
I'm a lager man. Yeah.
Well,
there seems to be a nascent craft beer industry in India, and time I was there, just starting to kick off. Went to a few breweries in Pune and in Bangalore.
Yeah.
Did we get one in Delhi? I don't think we got one in Delhi.
There was one, but then it closed down. It closed down.
Okay, well, Try and get it open before we come back.
Definitely.
You might find quite a few at Gurugram, isn't it?
There were a couple, but they also closed down. This talk of reopening because of the laws, and also they're changing that. And hopefully, by the time Peter comes in here next in 2022, or in fact the 2021 World Cup next year, fingers crossed. You never know. We hope to have some breweries up. I remember one of my finest brews was tasting at the Trent Inn at Trent Bridge. Peter, I'm sure after don't want to say when England beat Australia, but or Australia beat England, you went there to celebrate perhaps with the pale ale at the Trent Inn. That's one of the best.
Yeah, there is something special about English pubs, isn't it? That is one thing we'll give them. Their pubs are good, eh? And Australians mock their beer. They say it's warm and flat, but when you're in England, it's just right. You know, it kind of suits the mood, sort of warm and flat. Isn't it?
Right. So it's all things beer and all things cricket. Our thanks to Peter Lalor for joining us all the way from Sydney, taking his time out and giving us his insights about Australian cricket, about IPL, about BBL, and of course about some of his favorite brews. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today.
Thank you. It got me thinking about a beer now, and it's actually beer o'clock in Australia. I don't know what time it is there.
well, it's a little early for beers, but yeah, we'll open one in your name, especially when I'm editing this out. Thanks to Deep for also making time and joining us. This podcast is, as always, this podcast is now available on all the podcast avenues. You can tune into it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on Google Podcasts, and it is available on YouTube as well. For now, it is the end of this current episode. We'll see you next time. Stay safe.
Dhoni finishes off in style. A magnificent strike into the crowd. India lift the World Cup after 28 years.